An experience beyond limits, pain and pleasure indivisible. This is the untold truth of Hellraiser. What's in a name? Well, quite a lot when it comes to a movie. Just imagine if Toy Story had been called Toys in the Hood, Alien had been called Star Beast, or Back to the Future had been called Spaceman from Pluto, because they all almost were. Would these films still have gone on to be box office smashes and critical faves? We'll never know. But what we do know is that Hellraiser was very nearly called Sadomasochists from Beyond the Grave. Clive Barker explained in a 1987 interview with Fangoria that he originally wanted Hellraiser to have a very different title. He revealed, "The imagery we're employing is, as far as the creatures from hell are concerned, something that hasn't been done before. They're like sadomasochists from beyond the grave. In fact, that's what I originally wanted to call the picture. As far as titles go, it's certainly a bit beyond the pale and definitely a lot different from The Hellbound Heart, the title of the novella that inspired the film. Still, if there was ever to be a gang name that nailed the vibe that Pinhead, Butterball, and the rest of the Cenobites give off, Sadomasochists from Beyond the Grave is perfectly spot on." Alongside Leatherface, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and Pennywise, Pinhead is an almost universally recognizable villain and an iconic embodiment of 80s horror. It might be surprising then that in the first Hellraiser films, he's not technically a bad guy, just an infernal ambassador who takes his job extremely seriously. According to his creator, though, the moniker Pinhead doesn't exactly do the character justice. Clive Barker explained in an interview with Dread Central that the character was a priest of hell who remained nameless in the original script. However, a special effects artist referred to him as Pinhead, and that was that. Barker recalled, "I was like, wait a second, you just named my villain Pinhead? I didn't think that sounded very dignified, but it ended up on the call sheet and it just stuck."
Who you calling Pinhead?
Before the release of Hellraiser, no one realized how popular the guy with nails in his face would end up being. The Hell Priest wasn't even the original poster boy for the film. Pinhead actor Doug Bradley told HorrorOnline.com that a flayed Frank was originally the image intended to grace posters and lunchboxes. At some point during production, the powers that be opted for the grid-faced man to push the film into the darkest corners of the public consciousness. Bradley explained, "The image is so original, so startling. It is just an incredible image to look at, and that made a big difference in terms of the public's perception of the movie." On one level, Hellraiser is a cautionary tale about what happens to a curious individual when he meddles in the supernatural. In another sense, if you look past the flesh flaying, the screams, the carnage, and the sadist with pins in his face, you'll find what Clive Barker has referred to as a love story from beyond the grave. It might sound absurd, but take a closer look and you'll see that Barker isn't wrong. The author explained that just as it's desire that leads Frank Cotton to a lonely place where he's skinned alive, it's the same desire that leads his brother's wife Julia Cotton down the road to ruin. Julia attempts to resurrect her old lover by butchering unsuspecting men so Frank can feed on their precious blood, but as Barker points out, she doesn't do it because she's a psychopath. She does it for love. Barker stressed in the same interview that he intended Hellraiser to be an intelligent and popular horror movie that didn't exploit women or manipulate sensibilities. He told Monsterland, "There has been a general move towards the infantile in horror pictures recently, a desire to soften the blows. I hope this time we're going to get tough again." Let's be honest. The Cenobites are a pretty eye-catching bunch. If Pinhead and his posse strutted into a party, it would certainly cause a stir. Their look is hellish, and with all the leather and boots, it's reminiscent of the weirdest shock rock group never to play a gig. You wouldn't want to bump into these guys in a graveyard or an S&M club, the latter of which, according to Clive Barker, is the inspiration for the Cenobites' distinctive look. Barker told The Guardian that both the physical and emotional makeup of the Cenobites was inspired by S&M clubs he had frequented, specifically an underground club in New York called Cell Block 28. Barker revealed that Cell Block 28 had a hardcore S&M night where there was no drinking or drugs, just intense pain, pleasure, and a whole lot of piercings. He elaborated, "It was the first time I ever saw people pierced for fun. It was the first time I saw blood spilt."
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Barker explained that the move to make the Cenobites act and dress a certain way was met with positive reception from the S&M community, saying, "I was validating a lifestyle. It was a celebration of the beauty of these strange, secret rituals." Having only made a couple of short films with a group of friends in Liverpool as a teenager, Hellraiser was Clive Barker's first experience helming a major movie production. Directing a feature film for the first time was a daunting task, as he revealed in an interview. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know who the sound guy was. I only knew who the camera operator was because he was the guy behind the camera. I don't think that finally hurt the movie. May have actually been useful because I sort of made it up as I went along. When Barker was young, he and a group of friends grabbed an 8mm camera and shot 2 shorts, Salome and The Forbidden, inspired by underground and experimental directors like Kenneth Anger. Future Hellraiser collaborators Doug Bradley and Pete Atkins were involved in the productions. Barker reflected on his work by saying, "They are technically extremely crude and their storylines obscure. Actually, I think it has a strange poetry about it. That strange poetry, as well as the themes of packs, rituals, killers, and sexuality, have a lot in common with Hellraiser as we know it today." The puzzle box in Hellraiser, with which Frank opens the doors to another dimension, is integral to the franchise's overarching plot. The peculiar-looking device, also known as the Lament configuration, was described in The Hellbound Heart as one of several in existence that was created by Frenchman Philippe Lemarchand. One is said to be safely under lock and key in the basement of the Vatican. Another was rumored to have been in the possession of Marquis de Sade during his tenure at the Bastille, and a third found its way into the hands of an Englishman named Frank.
Let me see. No, don't touch it. It's dangerous. It opens doors.
The inspiration for the puzzle box came from an unlikely source, Clive Barker's grandfather. According to an interview with the podcast The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, Barker wanted his characters to access hell in a unique way. He was eventually drawn to a childhood memory of an elaborate wooden puzzle box his grandfather, who was a ship's cook, brought back from the Far East. Barker recalled playing with the box a lot as a child. When he was puzzling about how best his character in The Hellbound Heart could open the doors of hell, he remembered his grandfather's box, and the final piece fell into place. It's no good sweating buckets to create a horror film designed to shock and unnerve the audience if you pay little attention to the soundtrack. Music adds ambiance, atmosphere, suspense, and dread to a movie. In short, the Cenobites can't exactly share screen time with a Disney-style soundtrack. It would be terribly unbecoming. Before Hellraiser's release, industrial band Coil delivered a sonically charged hellscape of a soundtrack to accompany Clive Barker's film. However, it never made the final cut and was replaced by Christopher Young's more traditional score. Barker was friendly with the members of Coil and felt their unique sound would make a perfect fit for Hellraiser. The studio disagreed, apparently deciding that the soundtrack was just too unsettling. Anyone familiar with Coil's work during that period wouldn't have been surprised, as Barker himself once said, "Coil is the only group I've heard on disc whose records I've taken off because they make my bowels churn." However, the truth as to why Coil's Hellraiser soundtrack was never given the green light is far more pedestrian. Coil's Stephen Thrower told The Quietus that when Barker asked the producers for more special effects funding, they said something along the lines of, "We didn't think this was going to be as commercial as it is. Reshoot those effects scenes and here's some more money. One stipulation, we want our man to do the score." Movie sets are hectic places. Everyone's got a job to do and everyone's rushing around frantically, trying not to get in one another's way. Costume designers, camera operators, production managers, and boom operators all play their part in a constant effort to keep things from going off the rails. On the set of Hellraiser, they also had their very own maggot and cockroach wrangler to keep things in order. It was an odd job, but a necessary one in a pre-CGI age where everyone had to get their hands dirty to create something authentic. In an interview with Film Threat, Clive Barker pointed out that being on a movie set for 14 straight hours and dealing with 30 different people, all with equally important jobs to do, was far more tiring than he had anticipated. But relief came with the insects. Barker enthused, "The moments which were really exciting were the major cockroach scenes, which I really liked. We had a roach wrangler. We had Tupperware, you know? The ultimate Tupperware container. Your roach Tupperware container in the fridge." Barker explained that special passports and visas were needed to import extra large American cockroaches to the UK. The crew could only import male cockroaches because there was a danger that they could escape and procreate. Barker joked, "Somewhere in customs, there's presumably a roach sexer." Although many people praised Hellraiser upon its release for breathing new life into the horror genre, not everyone was won over by Clive Barker's vision. Famed film critic Roger Ebert gave Hellraiser a paltry half-star review, decrying it as a dreary sham. He wrote somewhat viciously, "This is one of those movies you sit through with mounting dread, as the fear grows inside of you that it will turn out to be feature-length." He didn't care much for its sequel either, which he made clear on his TV show.
The problem here is that there was no discernible beginning, middle, or end to this nightmare, just a series of disconnected and gruesome scenes.
If that seems a tad harsh, it gets worse. Ebert questioned the motives of the audience for going to see the movie in the first place. In his opinion, Hellraiser contained no surprises or emotional engagement and lacked any wit or flair. Interestingly, Ebert's harsh verdict on the film appeared to be the opening shot in a war of words between the legendary critic and Clive Barker, as chronicled on Ebert's own website. Years after the release of Hellraiser, Barker would slam the critic for making the controversial statement that video games can never be art. Barker described Ebert as prejudiced, calling him a, quote, pompous, arrogant old man. How much bearing Ebert's notorious review of Hellraiser had on Barker's scathing words, we'll never know. But just as criticism is always subjective, an artist never forgets a bad review. Imagine Pinhead and Michael Myers battling it out in a cinematic crossover along the lines of Freddy vs. Jason or Alien vs. Predator, and then imagine it some more, because it's never gonna happen. However, it nearly did, although it probably wouldn't have contained a lot of small talk between the chief Cenobite and the masked murderer. Hellraiser vs. Halloween was a promising premise nevertheless. Paul Kane's book, The Hellraiser Films and Their Legacy, reveals that filmmaker Dave Parker once pitched the idea of a crossover event to Dimension Films. Parker needed a way to get the two villains together for a rumble, so he hatched an origin story in which Myers is trick-or-treating as a child and receives a mysterious box from a stranger in black boots. Upon opening it, the Lord of the Dead possesses Myers' body and goes on a killing spree. Since he's possessed by a demonic entity, Myers cannot be killed until Pinhead shows up years later. From there, it's game on. Dimension was excited enough to reach out to both Clive Barker and John Carpenter and penciled in a release date of October 31st, 2004. However, not only did the owners of the Halloween movie rights throw shade on the idea, a poll on the official Halloween website suggested that the majority of fans didn't want the movie to happen, so it didn't. One of the most unsettling things about the Cenobites, apart from their insatiable desire to inflict pain, is their unnerving silence. Unwavering eye contact with unreadable yet intense facial expressions combined with the art of keeping your entire body extremely still is the embodiment of psychological intimidation. The Cenobites are obvious masters at it. With the exception of Pinhead, who's not exactly Mr. Talkative, the rest of the Cenobites in Hellraiser are a pretty mute bunch. Even the Chatterer isn't much of a chatterbox. In total, Pinhead is only in the original film for 8 minutes and doesn't have a lot of lines. That's why it's no wonder that, combined with the industrial makeup, Doug Bradley thought he would be unrecognizable in character. In an interview with The Guardian, Bradley explained that he was offered both the role of Pinhead and the bit part of a moving man. He had reservations about playing a heavily made-up monster, saying, "Because Hellraiser was my first movie, I thought it might be a good idea to be on screen as myself." But it was a brief conversation. There was no doubt in my mind that this unnamed guy with the pins in his head had a certain je ne sais quoi that a mattress delivery guy didn't. The first time Bradley saw himself in the mirror as Pinhead, he knew he had made the right decision. He continued, "I had a sense of majesty. His threat is implied. Look what I did to myself. Now imagine what I can do to you."
Trick us again, child. And your suffering will be legendary, even in hell.